The Battle of Aleppo is an ongoing military confrontation in Aleppo, the largest city in Syria, between the Free Syrian Army, Islamic Front, People's Defense Units and Sunni militants against the Syrian government, Hezbollah and Shiite militants. The battle began on 19 July 2012 as a part of the Syrian civil war. The battle's scale and importance led combatants to name it the Mother of Battles. The battle has been marked by the Syrian army's indiscriminate use of barrel bombs dropped from helicopters, killing thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands have been forced to evacuate. The London-based organization Syrian Observatory for Human Rights denounced the Free Syrian Army for its indiscriminate bombardment of government-held districts with gas cylinders filled with explosives, which resulted in hundreds of casualties. The battle has caused catastrophic destruction to the old city of Aleppo, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Onset: Aleppo is Syria's largest city with a population of 2.5 million people. An UNESCO World Heritage Site, it has been described by Time as Syria's commercial capital. Prior to the outbreak of hostilities in Aleppo in July 2012, nationwide protests against the government led by President Bashar al-Assad had occurred since 15 March 2011, as part of the Arab Spring. The inhabitants of Syria's two largest cities, Damascus and Aleppo, were initially largely uninvolved. As well as opposition protests, government-organized rallies in support of itself were held. Aleppo had remained undisturbed by the 16-month-long conflict till the 22nd of July, when rebel fighters from the neighboring villages converged and penetrated into it. Combatants. At the beginning of the Battle of Aleppo, rebels reportedly had between 6,000 and 7,000 fighters in 18 battalions. The largest rebel group was the Al-Tawhid Brigade and the most prominent was the Free Syrian Army, largely composed of army defectors. Most of the rebels came from the Aleppo countryside and from towns including Al-Bab, Maria, Azaz, Tel Rifaat and Manbij. A resident of Aleppo reportedly accused the rebels of using civilian homes for shelter. On 19 November 2012, the rebel fighters, particularly the Al-Tawhid Brigade and the Al-Nusra Front, initially rejected the newly formed Syrian National Coalition. However, the next day the rebels withdrew their rejection. By December, rebel fighters were commonly looting for supplies. They switched their loyalties to groups that had more to share. This new approach led to the killing of at least one rebel commander following a dispute. Fighters retreating with their loot caused the loss of a frontline position and the failure of an attack on a Kurdish neighborhood. The looting cost the rebel fighters much popular support. Islamic extremists and foreign fighters, many of whom were experienced and came from the ongoing insurgency in neighboring Iraq, joined the battle. Jihadists reportedly came from across the Muslim world. Jacques Beres, a French surgeon who treated wounded fighters, reported a significant number of foreign fighters, most of whom had Islamist goals and were not directly interested in Bashar al-Assad. They included Libyans, Chechens, and Frenchmen. Beres contrasted the situation in Aleppo with that in Idlib and Homs, where foreign forces were not common. Some FSA brigades cooperated with Mujahideen fighters. The government retained support in Aleppo. A rebel commander said, "Around 70% of Aleppo city is with the regime." During the course of the battle, Assad lost support from Aleppo's wealthy class. CBS News reported that 48 elite businessmen who were the primary financiers for the government switched sides. For the first time, the Syrian army engaged in urban warfare. They divided their forces into groups of 40 soldiers each. These were armed mostly with automatic rifles and anti-tank rockets, and artillery. Tanks and helicopters were only used for support. In August 2012, the army deployed its elite units, and eventually, after the rebels executed Shabir and Zaino al-Berri, tribal leader of the al-Berri tribe, the tribe joined the fight against the rebels. The Christians supported the army and formed militias aligned with the government following the capture of their quarters by the Syrian army. The Christian Armenians also supported the Syrian army. Aleppo's Armenians say Turkey supported the FSA to attack Armenians and Arab Christians. The Armenians had a militia with around 150 fighters. At the beginning of the battle, Aleppo's Kurds formed armed groups, most notably, the Kurdish Salahaddin Brigade, which worked with the opposition. The Kurdish Democratic Union Party had poor relations with both sides. The PYD's Popular Protection Committees stayed out of Arab areas and insisted the FSA stay out of the Kurdish area. They did not initially fight the Syrian army unless attacked, but later joined the opposition against pro-Assad forces. The Kurdish areas in Aleppo were mainly under PYD control. 400 Turkmen joined the battle under Sultan Abdul Hamid Han. Course of the battle. 2012. Initial rebel attack and capture of eastern Aleppo. Gunfire between rebels and security forces broke out in and around Salaheddina, a district in the city's southwest, on the night of the 19th of July 2012. After 1 week of war, The Guardian wrote, the U.S. says it fears that the Assad regime is lining up to commit a massacre in Aleppo, but it has repeated its reluctance to intervene in the conflict. In late July and early August 2012, the FSA continued its offensive in Aleppo, with both sides suffering a high level of casualties. Rebel commanders said their main aim was to capture the city center. The rebels seized a strategic checkpoint in Anadan, a town north of Aleppo, gaining a direct route between the city and the Turkish border, an important rebel supply base. They also captured Al-Bab, an army base northeast of the city. Later, rebels attacked the air base at Minik, 30 kilometers northwest of Aleppo, with arms and tanks captured at the Anadan checkpoint. Opposition forces continued to gain territory in the city, controlling most of eastern and southwestern Aleppo, including Salaheddina and parts of Hamdaniya. They continued to target security centers and police stations as clashes erupted near the Air Force Intelligence Headquarters in Aleppo's northwestern district Zahra. Rebels overran several police stations and posts in the central and southern districts of Bab al-Nerib, al-Miyasa and Salhain, seizing a significant quantity of arms and ammunition. 2013. Advances and counter-advances. In December 2012, the Al-Nusra Front unilaterally declared a no-fly zone and threatened to shoot down commercial aircraft, alleging that the government was using them to transport loyalist troops and military supplies. After multiple attacks on Aleppo International Airport, all flights were suspended on 1 January 2013. The following month, the rebels seized Umayyad Mosque, and during the battle, the mosque's museum caught fire and its ceiling collapsed. On 9 June, the Syrian army announced the start of Operation Northern Storm, an attempt to recapture territory in and around the city. Between 7 and 14 June, army troops, government militiamen and Hezbollah fighters launched the operation. Over a 1-week period, government forces advanced in the city and the countryside, pushing back the rebels. However, according to an opposition activist, on 14 June the situation started reversing after rebels halted an armored reinforcement column from Aleppo that was heading for 2 Shiite villages northwest of the city. On 8 November, the Syrian army launched an offensive in the rebel-held Base 80. The army, according to the residents, launched the heaviest barrage in more than a year. Al Jazeera wrote that a government victory would cut the rebels' route between the city and Al-Bab. 2 days later, Reuters reported that the rebels had regrouped to fight the Syrian army. 15 rebels were killed and the army recaptured the base. The following month, the army besieged the city in Operation Canopus Star. The army helicopters attacked with barrel bombs, killing more than 1,000 people, according to the Free Syrian Army's Abu Firas al-Halabi. 2014. This culminated in the capture of the Sheikh Najjar industrial district north of Aleppo and the lifting of the siege of Aleppo Central Prison on 22 May 2014, which contained a garrison of government soldiers that had resisted rebel forces since 2012. A ceasefire proposal was presented by a UN envoy in November. Under the proposal, the Syrian Arab Army would allow the rebels to leave Aleppo without violence and would help with their transportation. In return, the militants would surrender their arms. President Assad reportedly agreed to consider taking this ceasefire plan, though no official confirmation was made. The FSA rejected the plan. Its military commander Zahar al-Sakit said they had learned not to trust the Bashar al-Assad regime because they're cunning and only want to buy time. 2015. War of Attrition. In early January, the rebels recaptured the Majbal area of al-Brej and captured the southern entrance of the stone quarries known as al-Misa, forcing government troops to retreat to the north. Rebels also seized the Manasher al-Brej area. They tried to advance and take control of al-Brej Hill, with which they could seize the military supply road running between Aleppo Central Prison and the Handarit and al-Mala areas. At the end of January, the rebels took control over some positions in al-Brej Hill. In mid-February, the Syrian Arab Army and its allies launched a major offensive in the northern Aleppo countryside, with the aim of cutting the last rebel supply routes into the city, and relieving the rebel siege of the Shia-majority towns Zahra and Nubl to the northwest of Aleppo. They quickly captured several villages, but bad weather conditions and an inability to call up reinforcements stalled the government offensive. A few days later, the rebels launched a counter-offensive, retaking 2 of 4 positions they had lost to Syrian government forces. On 9 March, opposition forces launched an assault on Handarit, north of Aleppo, after reportedly noticing confusion in the ranks of Syrian government troops after the February fighting. Opposition sources said the rebels had captured 40 to 50% of the village, or possibly even 75%, while the army remained in control of the northern portion of Handarit. In contrast, a Syrian army source stated they still controlled 80% of Handarit. On 18 March, after almost 10 days of fighting, the Syrian army had fully expelled the rebels from Handarit and re-established control of the village. On 17 June, rebel forces captured the western neighborhood of Rashidin from Syrian government forces. Throughout 19 and 20 June, a new round of rebel shelling killed 19 more civilians. In early July, 2 rebel coalitions launched an offensive against the government-held western half of the city. During 5 days of fighting, the rebels seized the Scientific Research Center on Aleppo's western outskirts, which was being used as a military barracks. 2 rebel attacks on the Jamiat al-Zahra area were repelled. Government forces launched an unsuccessful counter-attack against the Scientific Research Center. In mid-October, ISIL captured 4 rebel-held villages northeast of Aleppo, while the army seized the Syria-Turkey Free Trade Zone, the Al-Amadayth juvenile prison and cement plant. On 19 October, the SAA and Hezbollah captured the hilltop of Tel Syria Tel in southern Aleppo, killing 20 rebels in the process. The next day, the SAA and the Hezbollah captured 2 more towns, Al-Safera and Balus, in southern Aleppo. Strategic analysis. Rebel forces expanded into the countryside south of Aleppo to control sections of the M4 and M5 highways, effectively blocking ground reinforcements for the Syrian army. Before the end of 2012, the Syrian army in Aleppo was receiving sporadic supplies and ammunition replenishment by air or via backroads. The fall of Base 46, a large complex that reinforced and supplied government troops, was seen by experts as a tactical turning point that may lead to a strategic shift in the battle for Aleppo. In a November 2012 intelligence report, American publisher Strategic Forecasting, Inc. described the strategic position of government forces in Aleppo as dire, and said the Free Syrian Army had essentially surrounded. On 26 November 2012, rebels captured Attrition Dam, further isolating government forces in Aleppo and leaving only one route into Aleppo. By late January 2013, Deputy Prime Minister Qadri Jamil said all supply routes to Aleppo had been cut off by opposition forces, comparing the situation to the siege of Leningrad. By late February 2013, Aleppo International Airport was almost surrounded by rebel forces. Later, the Syrian army regained control of the strategic town Tel Shigab, allowing them to approach the airport. In November 2013, the Syrian army retook the town of al-Safira. This opened a road for the government to support the besieged Kuvaya's military airbase and Aleppo power plant. In February 2014, it was reported that the army planned to encircle Aleppo and impose blockades and truces. It would also try to recapture Sheikh Najar industrial city to rebuild the economy and provide jobs. By October 2014, the army had seized Sheikh Najar, reinforced Aleppo Central Prison and captured Handarat, almost besieging rebel-held Aleppo. Tensions peaked in early April 2014, when a Syrian Republican Guard officer allegedly killed a Hezbollah commander during an argument over the opposition advance in al-Rashidin, and other pro-government militant groups sent his reinforcements, such as the National Defense Force, proved to be unreliable in combat. Effectively cutting off access was more difficult in Aleppo because rebels controlled more terrain there than in other cities. Rebels also have a strong presence in the countryside and around the border crossings with Turkey. In April 2014, government commanders inside the city were saying that contrary to implementing such a strategy, the best they can do in Aleppo is just secure positions. The rebels' strategic victory at the siege of Wadi Daif resulted in threats to several main government supply lines. This cast doubt on government forces' ambitions to control the road from Hama to Aleppo and the Damascus-Aleppo International Road, and has been seen as a personal defeat for Syrian Arab Army Col. Suhail al-Hassan. Staffan de Mistura, the United Nations and Arab League envoy to Syria, proposed a pause in fighting, but opinions about implementation were divided. The European Union warned that cases of forced surrender imposed by the Assad regime through starvation sieges were labeled fallaciously as local ceasefires in the past. The southern front of the Free Syrian Army, which was gaining ground in Daraa province south of Damascus, warned that a freeze in fighting in Aleppo could hamper their advance, as pro-Assad forces could be redirected from Aleppo. The Syrian government's defeat at the Second Battle of Idlib in late March 2015, which helped expand the influence of the al-Nusra Front, forced the Islamic State to expand its attacks in central Syria after it failed to block the Raqqa highway that branches out to the Syrian army's main supply route to Aleppo along the Qanazir-Athria road. IS's aim would potentially be to establish the necessary conditions to attack Idlib and al-Nusra. The March-April offensive in central Syria led some volunteers defending the Homs-Aleppo highway to consider deserting to defend their hometowns. According to Jane's information group, a possible offensive on Homs by both al-Nusra Front and is working independently might force the government to move critical forces away from Aleppo to defend key supply routes. After additional opposition gains during the 2015 JISR al-Shafur offensive, Jane said it was no longer possible for the SAA to properly reinforce Aleppo, leaving the forces vulnerable to any opposition or as offensive on the city. If opposition forces decided to capitalize on the gains and launch an assault towards Latakia, the prospect of soldiers deserting was raised because if they were not redeployed back to defend it, they could defend their own homes against any potential rebel advance. Syrian government minister Faisal Mekdad stated in June 2015, "All our strategic planning now is to keep the way open to Aleppo to allow our forces to defend it." Barrel bombs. In 2014, the United Nations adopted Resolution 2139, which ordered the end of using barrel bombs in the battle. The Syrian Observatory of Human Rights claims that the Syrian army dropped 7,000 barrel bombs in the first 5 months of 2015, claiming the lives of 3,000 people. Amnesty International claims that barrel bombs killed 3,000 people in 2014. Channel 4 claims that videos have emerged online showing the Syrian army using barrel bombs. The Syrian government has been alleged of using the barrel bombs several times. Some of them are, according to Middle East Monitor, reported the death of 14 people allegedly caused by the bombs in the Khalazar and Kashila neighborhood of the city in June 2015. CNN Ibn wrote about the government of dropping barrel bombs in July in the neighborhood of Al-Bab, causing the death of 35 and injuring 50 others. The BBC alleged the government of dropping the same in May, leading to the death of 72 civilians. The Anadolu Agency of Turkey wrote that the bombs launched by the government forces in July killed 15 people. However, the government has denied using barrel bombs. In an interview to BBC, President Bashar al-Assad denied using indiscriminate weapons, like barrel bombs, in the rebel-held territories. Assad said, "I know about the army. They use bullets, missiles and bombs. I haven't heard of the army using barrels, or maybe cooking pots." Destruction of heritage. Time magazine wrote, "The ongoing devastation inflicted on the country's stunning archaeological sites, bullet holes lodged in walls of its ancient Roman cities, the debris of Byzantine churches, early mosques and Crusader fortresses, rob Syria of its best chance for a post-conflict economic boom based on tourism, which, until the conflict started 18 months ago, contributed 12% to the national income." The Al Medina Souk, a major souk in Aleppo, was affected by a fire in September 2012. The Irish Times reported that around 700 to 1,000 shops were destroyed by the fire, which had been caused by firing and shelling. The following month, there were reports of the Great Mosque of Aleppo being damaged by rocket-propelled grenades. Fighting with mortars and machine guns caused damage to the main gate and the prayer hall. The attack continued in the mosque till it was repelled by the army. The Citadel of Aleppo was damaged during Syrian army shelling. On the 2nd of October, Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, expressed her grave concern about possible damage to precious sites, and requested the combatants to ensure the protection of the outstanding cultural legacy that Syria hosts on its soil. She cited the Hague Convention for protecting the heritage sites.